There is a particular kind of spotlight that never quite switches off. It follows you into the quiet corners of your life, it waits outside the restaurant where you thought nobody would recognize you, and it hums somewhere in the background even, on the days when you are trying, genuinely trying, to just be a normal person living a normal life. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, that spotlight has been a constant companion for the better part of a decade now. It was there when they announced their engagement on the steps of Kensington Palace. It was there when they walked away from senior royal duties in what the tabloids immediately and breathlessly christened Megxit, and it is very much still there now in 2025. As the couple navigate a media landscape that has shifted beneath their feet in ways that even the most seasoned industry observers did not fully anticipate when Harry and Meghan first set out to build what they described as their independent life. The story of Harry and Meghan's commercial journey since stepping back from the royal family is, depending on who you ask, either a cautionary tale about the limits of celebrity reinvention or a work in progress that simply has not yet reached its conclusion. The truth, as is usually the case with stories this complicated and this emotionally loaded, probably sits somewhere in the messy middle. What is not in dispute is that the couple arrived in California trailing what seemed, at the time, like an almost inexhaustible reserve of public fascination. They had the drama of their departure. They had the Oprah interview, which landed like a thunderclap across the Atlantic and sent palace communications teams into crisis mode for weeks afterward. They had the Netflix docuseries, which pulled back curtains that many people in royal circles had assumed were permanently sealed. And they had Harry's memoir, Spare, which broke records and broke relationships in roughly equal measure. For a period, it seemed as though the supply of revelations was limitless, and that the appetite for those revelations was equally without end. But time has a way of changing things, and the media industry, which operates on the twin fuels of novelty and outrage, has begun to ask a question that would have seemed almost unthinkable just a few years ago. What happens when the stories start to feel familiar? What happens when the audience has already absorbed the shock, processed the grief, formed its opinions, and moved on to the next thing demanding its attention? These are the questions that commentators and industry insiders have been wrestling with as they try to make sense of where Harry and Meghan stand today, and the answers they are arriving at are not entirely comfortable reading for the couple or their team. Amanda Platell, the longtime Daily Mail columnist who has never made any secret of her skepticism toward the Sussexes, put it in characteristically blunt terms when she argued recently that the couple's only real currency, the one thing they possess that the media genuinely wants and that audiences reliably consume, is their willingness to criticize the royal family. Strip that away, Platell suggested, and what you are left with is a couple who are, in commercial terms, difficult to differentiate from any number of other celebrity lifestyle brands jostling for space in an already overcrowded market. It is a harsh assessment, and one that the Sussexes and their supporters would vigorously contest. But it is also one that a growing number of industry voices have been willing to echo in recent months, even if they tend to do so in slightly more diplomatic language. Duncan Larcombe, the royal correspondent and author who spent years covering the royal family for The Sun before becoming one of the more thoughtful, independent voices on matters of monarchy and celebrity, framed it somewhat differently when he spoke to the Mirror. Larcombe's argument was that Harry and Meghan have essentially run out of what he called truth bombs, the dramatic revelations and emotional disclosures that drove the initial wave of public interest in their story. Every relationship has a finite number of genuinely shocking things to reveal about itself, and the Sussex story, however extraordinary, is not exempt from that basic law of human communication. Once you have told the world about the conversations that allegedly took place behind palace walls, once you have described the alleged indifferences and the alleged cruelties and the alleged institutional failures, the question becomes, where? You go from there. You can go deeper, but the audience that was captivated by the surface-level drama may not follow you into the depths. You can go broader, building a lifestyle brand that encompasses wellness and philanthropy and content creation, but then you are competing on terrain where your royal background is no longer an automatic advantage and where authenticity, not ancestry, is the primary currency. Larcombe also touched on something that is increasingly central to any serious analysis of the Sussex situation, which is the way that digital platforms have fundamentally altered the economics of celebrity. The streaming wars of the early 2020s, produced a period of almost reckless generosity toward high-profile names, with platforms falling over themselves to sign deals that would have seemed implausible in any previous era of the entertainment industry. Netflix, Amazon, Apple, and their competitors were buying names as much as they were buying content, reasoning that the mere association with someone like Prince Harry or Meghan Markle would generate the kind of earned media attention that no advertising budget could replicate. That calculation made a certain kind of sense in a moment when the platforms were expanding rapidly and when subscriber growth was the metric that mattered above all others. But the moment has changed. The platforms are now in a more mature and more cost-conscious phase of their development, and the question they are asking of every deal is no longer simply whether it generates buzz, but whether it generates actual viewership, actual engagement, actual retention of paying subscribers. That is a harder test to pass, and it is one that has tripped up quite a few high-profile names who signed deals on the strength of their celebrity rather than their proven ability to create compelling content. The evolution of the Netflix relationship is perhaps the clearest illustration of this shift as it applies to the Sussexes. When the couple first announced their deal with the streaming giant back in 2020, it came with a reported price tag in the region of $100 million, a figure that reflected both the cultural moment and the platform's ambitions. The docuseries that emerged from that deal attracted enormous viewership, with Netflix reporting that it became one of the most watched documentary series in the platform's history in its opening weeks. But viewership figures tell only part of the story. The critical reception was mixed. The controversy surrounding the series generated exactly the kind of media noise that Netflix had probably hoped for, but it also deepened the polarization around the couple in ways that may have complicated subsequent commercial efforts. By 2025, the relationship has evolved into what is described as a first-look arrangement, a significantly less intensive form of partnership in which Netflix gets the right of first refusal on projects the Sussexes develop but is no longer committed to funding a slate of content in the way that the original deal envisioned. In the language of Hollywood deal-making, a first-look arrangement is often a polite form of stepping back, a way of maintaining a relationship without bearing all the costs and risks that a full production commitment would entail. The end of Meghan's as ever brand partnership with Netflix has added another layer of complexity to this picture. As ever, the lifestyle brand that Meghan launched with considerable fanfare and which quickly generated significant commercial interest, including a sellout of its initial product offerings, has parted ways with Netflix as a distribution and content partner. A spokesperson for the brand was careful to describe the split as entirely amicable, attributing the separation to the brand's rapid growth and the need for a different kind of platform to support that growth going forward. Sources close to the situation have been at pains to emphasize that the personal relationship between Meghan and Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos remains warm and positive, which is the kind of detail that gets included in these statements precisely because it signals that nobody wants this to be read as a falling out. Whether or not you take that characterization entirely at face value probably depends on your prior disposition toward the Sussexes, but it is worth noting that brand partnerships evolve and dissolve all the time in the commercial world, and not every separation is a sign of failure. Sometimes a brand genuinely does outgrow a particular kind of partnership, and it is possible that As Ever, which built a substantial following quickly, has reached a point where its founder believes it needs room to develop in a direction that the Netflix relationship would have constrained. Still, the timing of all this is interesting, and timing is always worth paying attention to. The Sussexes are navigating these commercial transitions against a backdrop of what can only be described as renewed scrutiny of their overall appeal and marketability. Industry commentators who follow the celebrity and entertainment space have begun to note a pattern in which the couple's media footprint remains large, but their actual commercial outcomes have been more uneven than the size of that footprint might suggest. Big announcements tend to generate big headlines, but the question of how those announcements translate into sustained audience engagement and brand loyalty is one that the industry is watching with considerable interest. One of the more intriguing data points in this conversation is the announcement that Meghan is set to attend an event in Australia, with tickets priced at the equivalent of nearly $2,000 American dollars. The price point is significant, not because it is unusual for high-profile celebrity events, but because it speaks to a particular theory of the Sussexes' commercial model. If the currency that Platell and others have identified as the couple's primary asset is their connection to the royal family and the drama that surrounds that connection, Then the interesting test is whether that currency can be converted into something more durable and more self-sustaining. A speaking appearance at a premium-priced event suggests confidence that the audience will pay for access to Meghan's presence regardless of whether she is talking about royal matters or about something else entirely. But it also raises questions about the size of that audience and whether it can be maintained and grown over time in a way that supports a sustainable commercial enterprise. The broader context here is important. Celebrity culture in the mid-2020s is more fragmented and more competitive than it has ever been. The attention economy has been carved up into smaller and smaller segments by an ever-expanding array of platforms, personalities, and content formats. Sustaining a premium position in that environment requires constant reinvention, constant content generation, and a very clear sense of what you are offering your audience that they cannot get from anybody else. For Harry and Meghan, the question of what that unique offering is has always been somewhat complicated by the fact that their most distinctive attribute, their connection to the British royal family, is also the attribute that is most politically and emotionally fraught. Every time they invoke that connection, whether through direct commentary or through the more subtle signals embedded in their public persona, they risk reigniting the debates that have made them such polarizing figures. And every time they try to step away from that connection, to establish themselves as something entirely separate from the royal drama, they risk losing the thing that made them interesting in the first place. This is not a unique problem in the history of celebrity, but it is a particularly acute version of it. The Sussexes are not simply famous people trying to capitalize on their fame. They are famous people whose fame is inseparable from a specific and ongoing story, a story that involves institutions and family relationships and cultural debates about race and class and the nature of monarchy that are genuinely important to a lot of people. That is both a resource and a constraint. It gives their story weight and emotional resonance that most celebrity narratives simply cannot match. But it also means that every commercial decision they make is interpreted not just as a business choice but as a statement about who they are, what they stand for, and whether they are being authentic or strategic or both. Harry, for his part, has continued to invest in causes and institutions that reflect his long-standing interests, particularly around mental health, the Invictus Games, and the welfare of military veterans. These are areas where his credibility is essentially unimpeachable, where the story he tells about his own experiences resonates in a way that transcends the Sussex drama and speaks to something genuinely important about how societies treat the people they send to war and the psychological costs of that experience. The Invictus Games in particular remains a remarkable institution, one that continues to grow and to attract serious attention and support from governments and organizations around the world. Whatever else one might say about Harry's post-royal journey, his commitment to that enterprise represents something real and valuable that cannot be reduced to celebrity brand management. But the commercial world operates according to its own logic, and in that world, the question of what the Sussexes are worth, literally and figuratively, is one that has become more complicated over time. The initial valuations that the couple commanded in the immediate aftermath of their departure from royal life were premised on a level of public fascination that was perhaps always going to be difficult to sustain indefinitely. Fascination is not the same as affection, and affection is not the same as loyalty, and loyalty is ultimately what brand builders are trying to create when they move beyond the initial phase of generating attention and try to build something that will last. The transition from fascinating to beloved is one that many celebrities attempt and relatively few navigate successfully, and the Sussexes are very much in the middle of that transition right now. There are people, many people, who are genuinely devoted to Harry and Meghan, who find in their story something that speaks to their own experiences of feeling excluded or misunderstood or mistreated by institutions that were supposed to protect them. For these people, the couple's commercial success is not a matter of indifference. It feels personal, because the narrative that Harry and Meghan have told about their lives has touched something personal in them. This is the foundation of what could, in theory, become a very powerful and durable commercial enterprise, because fans who feel a genuine emotional connection to a brand or personality are far more valuable than casual consumers who are simply attracted to novelty. The challenge is that the Sussex audience is also unusually divided. For every person who sees Harry and Meghan as courageous truth-tellers who paid a heavy personal price for their integrity, there is someone else who sees them as calculating, Celebrities who have commercialized their grievances in a way that is disrespectful to an institution they chose to join and chose to leave. This division is not something that any amount of skilled public relations can fully resolve, because it is rooted in genuinely different values and genuinely different understandings of what loyalty and family and duty mean. And in the attention economy, where algorithms tend to amplify conflict rather than resolve it, the couple's polarizing quality means that virtually everything they do generates heated debate, which is exhausting for audiences and arguably counterproductive for brand building. Over the long term, what Larcombe and others are really pointing to when they talk about the couple running out of truth bombs is this. The provocations that generated debate and attention in the early phase of the Sussex story are becoming less effective not because the audience has stopped being interested in Harry and Meghan, but because the audience has already processed the most shocking elements of their narrative and is now waiting to see what comes next. The next chapter, to be commercially viable, needs to offer something that the previous chapters did not. It needs to be about something beyond the palace drama, or it needs to find a way to connect that drama to something larger and more universal, in a way that freshens the story for people who think they already know how it ends. Whether Harry and Meghan are capable of making that transition is genuinely uncertain, and anyone who tells you they know for sure is probably overestimating their ability to predict the behavior of the famously unpredictable attention economy. What is clear is that the couple is operating in a more challenging environment than the one they faced when they first arrived in California. The platforms are more demanding. The audience is more fragmented. The media landscape has moved on to new dramas and new controversies, and the couple themselves have now been public figures in their current incarnation for long enough that the novelty factor has significantly diminished. But it would be a mistake to write them off entirely, and several of the same commentators, who have raised questions about their commercial prospects, have also been careful to note that the story is far from over. Meghan's ability to build as ever into a brand that generated immediate and substantial commercial interest is not nothing. It suggests genuine entrepreneurial instincts and a real understanding of a specific consumer audience. The Australia event, with its premium ticket pricing, will be a test of whether that audience is willing to engage with Meghan outside the context of royal drama, and the results of that test will be instructive. Harry's continued work with Invictus and other causes keeps him visible and credible in spaces where his voice genuinely matters. And both of them remain, by any reasonable metric, among the most recognized and most discussed public figures on the planet, which is a form of capital that has not been exhausted even if its conversion rate has become more uncertain. The industry watchers who are scrutinizing the Sussex commercial situation most closely are essentially watching to see whether the couple can find a way to tell a new story, one that builds on what came before without being entirely defined by it. The currency that Platell identified, the willingness to criticize the royals, is real, but it is also, as she herself acknowledged, a limited resource. Criticism eventually runs into diminishing returns. The audience absorbs the critique, forms its view, and then wants to know what the critics are building in place of what they tore down. That is the question that Harry and Meghan have not yet fully answered, and it is the question that the next phase of their public life will need to address. In the meantime, the spotlight continues its patient vigil. It waits outside the wellness summits and the brand launches and the speaking engagements. It follows along to Australia and back again. It hums in the background of every business meeting and every content strategy session and every carefully calibrated public appearance. Harry and Meghan have spent years trying to control that spotlight, to direct it toward the things they want to illuminate and away from the things they would prefer to leave in shadow. They have had successes, and they have had setbacks, and the story is not finished yet. What seems increasingly clear, though, is that the next chapter will be written not by the drama of their departure from royal life, but by what they choose to build in the space that departure created. The world, or at least a very substantial portion of it, is watching to see what that turns out to be.